This is GeekSpeak, episode 40 of season 16. I'm Lyle Troxel, and with me in the studio is Miles Elam. He's a software engineer, pedant, curmudgeon, and political junkie. How's
it going?
It's good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
All right. We got some feedback from last week. I don't know if you recall, we talked a little about VI and Emacs.
Yes, so text editors that are running on 40 years old, somewhere thereabouts.
So we had an informal poll because
Right.
we asked people to email in if they use VI or Emacs. And 50-50, half Emacs users, half users. But I thought what was interesting is that...
And one user who was 50-50 within their own workflow.
That's right. Yes, at least one person actually could do either. Didn't really matter. And I got good feedback from listener Marcus on the cursor movement, which I thought was interesting. It says, by the way, HJKL, this is the keyboard navigation that we were joking about in VI, is loosely based on the ASCII meanings for control characters. Control H is backspace, Control J is line feed. And the old ADMA 3A terminal used Control H, Control J, Control K, and Control L for the cursor movement. And he thinks that the first to use this near standard. Okay, so that was the first to use it. And that was before the VT100, which is the terminal protocol, if you will. And in anything, I thought it was kind of cool to hear that the cursor movement goes back so far. Additionally, the ADM 3A was implemented using a single board of 7400 series ICs. So reduced control character count was important.
Which also means that escape mode is actually, originally with VI, a pass-through to the system for control characters.
Right, yeah. Which is just beautiful.
Which is, yeah.
Control system, right down to like the firmware of the board. Anyway, so we also got from Janine. She's a listener, works in the East Bay, and Vim has been my editor of choice for pretty much my entire career as a software engineer. It's efficient and works for everything I need, so why switch? I gotta say, I pretty much agree with her. Also, the Dvorak question came about, and we talked about the percentages of how fast Dvorak was compared to QWERTY, and it looks like it's really more like 5 to 10% increase.
That's what we had said before, right?
Well, we had some flavors of like why, but the thing that was interesting that Steve mentioned is that Dvorak shines, quote, where Dvorak shines is reduced wrist strain. I switched 17 years ago or thereabouts. My wrists were getting torn up by 80 hours a week of programming and writing. Ergo keyboards helped some, Dvorak helped more. Now I mostly use Dvorak on the Kinesis Ergo keyboard, and wrist and hand soreness is a thing of the past. The Kinesis Classic keyboard, by the way, is a thing of beauty. It takes some getting used to, but after that it becomes a cold, dead hands peripheral. Do you understand the reference to that?
Yes.
But I love that he's using gun. What is that?
A gun metaphor.
Well, it's not really a gun metaphor. It's like
a gun analogy.
Yeah, thank you. Good. In any case, that's a really good point. That if you are getting repetitive stress syndrome in your wrist, which happens to a lot of people, changing the layout of your keyboard would definitely modify that.
And you don't mind never being able to use anyone else's keyboard ever again.
But see, Miles, if you're a typist and you're typing 40 hours a week, the most important thing is the amount of time, like how your keyboard feels. So Ergo keyboard's good. If you still have problems, switching keyboard layout would definitely change.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. If you're spending 80 hours a week coding,
I said 40, but yeah.
Oh, I thought you said 80.
He said 80. Yeah,
yeah I think that's excessive.
Yeah, that's excessive. But you know, you love to program. And besides, it's 40 hours programming, 40 hours writing. I mean, there are other things, you know, writing emails, love letters. You spend 40 hours a week on Facebook.
No, not anymore.
How so?
Oh, I decided to take a break. One too many police snuff films for my taste.
What do you mean? Well, I think we talked about this before, actually. But basically, in your feed, because you're a politically motivated person online, you get videos of people getting murdered.
Yes.
In your feed. And they autoplay.
Yes.
It's pretty disgusting.
I did discover how to turn off autoplay in both the app and on the desktop.
Oh, that's important.
Well, and I actually posted it to Facebook saying, like, here's how to turn off autoplay. And it's, at least for the iPhone, it was ridiculous how complex it is. Like, how many levels deep you have to go to turn off autoplay.
Mm-hmm.
But it's possible. It's doable. But
well, so if you had autoplay off and you weren't auto-seeing the snuff films, why did you disable it from your phone?
It was an issue where there was a video, a gentleman in Charlotte got killed, and there's some supposition with video evidence that the police may have dropped a weapon after he was shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was already in question as to whether or not he was armed in the first place. And then there's the whole issue of North Carolina as an open carry state. And it ends up being extremely wearisome to have others say, like, for example, it starts off, well, he had a gun, the police were
justified.
Yeah, were feared for their life, and so they had to shoot. But North Carolina is an open carry state. Well, if he was threatening an officer, then you have to, well, he didn't have a gun. But even if he was making a threatening movement and the police don't know that.
So what you're saying is you saw this video and you saw you led to the conclusion that most likely you'd have this kind of discussion with people that you
I was already having that discussion with them. And it came to a head when I saw the exposition of the video saying, like, this person didn't have or did not appear to be carrying a gun, and the gun appeared to be dropped in the middle of that clip. The wife's recording from her from her camera, or widow, I should say. And I had seen so many times, like, for example, the young man in Baltimore who had his back broken in custody, and when there was a investigation of it, they said, yes, there was malfeasance. Obviously, someone did something wrong, but we're not going to make any charges, bring any charges to any officers who had access to him, because we can't be sure which one it was, and so we don't think we can get a conviction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a situation where I just did not want to watch that unfold again. I would rather
for your own personal
mental health, my own personal mental health. I wanted to go see other things and do other things and hang out with my family and just take a break from it for a while.
Okay. Do you find like you have a more obligation to speak out? I mean, you're very public. You know, we say that you're politically, what do we say? Politically,
a political junkie.
Political junkie. You're highly involved and engaged in this debate of malfeasance of police officers, and I would assume that in doing that, because you're level-headed and very clearly, you're very good at communicating. You have been for years. That your voice is useful in moving people towards your perspective. Don't you feel that at some level that's part of being an American?
Well, as for moving people in my direction, yes, I think there have been a handful that I have swayed, but for the most part, people's preconceived notions are really hard to change. That's something we already know.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice to be able to exchange information with friends of mine who are quite different from me politically, that especially when they're from high school, where I have a history with them. And so we can remain civil and like each other as people, even though we disagree strongly. It's a great place to be, where you're not just stuck in your bubble. You're able to get more information.
Do you think that you're changing some of their perspective, or opening their eyes at all to what your perspective is?
Opening your eyes is a little too strong. That presumes that I know the truth. And in many cases, I do get information from them as well, to get myself out of my own bubble. None of us is perfect. And so it is nice to have that back and forth. That's what I'm going for. The ability for, liberal, conservative, authoritarian, anarchist, those different areas, to be able to coexist and speak and talk about public policy without it into a rage fest.
Okay, but at the same time, this time around, you decided, I can't take it. I can't do it this time.
Yeah, in general, it's not the friends of mine, it's the friends of friends that will jump onto the thread, and then
where you become more anonymous to each other.
Yes, and also the people that I am friends with, because there are some folks that were so far what I considered off the rails that we just couldn't interact anymore. But there are, many of those friends that I still have there, I still like them. We have our disagreements, but that's fine. They may be friends with, like, for example, for them, they are far off from me politically. For them, they have friends where they are the center of the universe, and I am on one side, and they have another person that's on their.
Right. So that other person's highly diametrically opposed to your general perspective.
Yeah, and in many cases, I would say objectively racist or sexist, or or the like. And so it's there. It's also seeing the public debate that goes along with it, and it really is seeing everything having to do with the case. I've been kind of unplugging from the whole media.
Can you be objectively racist?
Can you be objectively racist?
Yeah.
Sure, you can be objectively non-racist.
Because isn't racist a feeling? I mean, you can do something that's objectively racist, but you can't be objectively racist because it's perspective of the human thought, right? You can represent yourself multiple times as objectively racist.
Now you're getting into the whole metaphysics of what is objective reason. What
long debate. I kind of tinged me because I said a moment ago I was complimenting you as a friend of mine who I respect the opinion, speaking eloquently, and I thought, wow, if it was a black guy I didn't know and I said speaking eloquently, I'm basically being racist in saying that, right? Because, well, he's a human being, of course he's speaking well. You've heard that terminology?
Sure.
And so when I said that to you, and I said, you speak eloquently, whatever it was that I said, I thought
I took it as a compliment.
Well, good. Well, you know me, and so you know what I think of you. But I definitely had the back of my mind where, like, ooh, is that a racist comment? That is a continual thing that goes on for.
I never heard it in terms of eloquence.
What was it? Well spoken. I said well spoken.
Yeah, so well spoken.
I think I said well spoken first and then eloquent. Okay. But anyway, doesn't matter. Should we move on?
Sure. I guess the moral of the story is unplug from social media when your mental health starts to degrade. We think about taking vacations from our jobs, but sometimes we need to take vacations from our social interactions as well, whatever they may be. They may not be political, as they are in my case. It may be just the fact that you need a break from hanging around other people and having that requirement to respond to other people, to like, it's something that a lot of people have talked about. They feel that obligation to validate the other person, to like it, to respond to it, to like. And I think it is important to unplug and give yourself a break when you notice the cracks starting to show. Yeah,
I think it's a wise thing to do for your own sense of well-being. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot to say that you have some kind of obligation to do anything at all, but I do appreciate that you engage in that debate. And when I do participate and see how eloquent you are in your argument, I regularly will read it to my wife, like, listen to what Miles said. So I'm glad you're still.
I had no idea. That's kind of awesome.
Really? Oh, cool. Hey, we talked a couple weeks ago about a image coming off of Facebook and how Facebook was removing images of nudity, and you can go back a couple episodes ago about that. And it was interesting. We had a correction on that, but I won't get more into that except to say that Facebook clearly can censor the content that's on their service, and it would be even hard to say that it is censorship in the traditional political term because it's a private.
Well, it is censorship,
yes,
but it is not government censorship, which is what the First Amendment deals with.
Right.
Private corporations are not subject to provisions of the Constitution.
That's right. And it is clearly how Facebook would decide to put things on and off of their service, as YouTube, as any website can do things of their own accord. The censorship that might be of concern is more of when the Great Wall of China actually edits files and restricts content to their
the Great Firewall.
The Great Firewall. But Krebs on Security has an interesting article about the democratization of censorship. And can you tell me a little bit about this article? First, Krebs is this great writer about security. And
Brian Krebs, yes.
Yeah, really, really good stuff. We've quoted him before.
I've been following him for going on 10 years now. He is on the forefront. We talked about him before on the show, where he gets into enough people's faces with regard to people who are organized crime online and doing all sorts of bad deeds, that he has regularly been a target where people have
attacked him,
tried to swat him. In other words, call the police saying there's an armed person on the premises trying to get the SWAT team to come and get involved. In other words, threaten his life.
Right. And of course, the translation of threaten your life is you could call saying, there's shooting in this house and there's people running in there and there's gunfire all around. When the police come, they're fully armed and they break through the house, and it's an extremely dangerous situation.
Yeah. Right. And the thing is, he has taken all of this in stride, and this is the vocation that I have taken up, and it is people have recognized it as a public good.
Mhm.
And
Like a
in
journalist.
fact, yes,
Yeah.
and in fact, Akamai, which is the caching server, geolocation caching, or
And
geocaching rather.
basically, this means it's a company that provides CDNs, or content delivery network,
Mhm.
and they basically have servers with hard drives at multiple hops across the internet and duplicate your content. So if we put a picture up for GeekSpeak and we were using one of these CDNs, and Akamai is kind of the famous one, there would be a copy of that image in New York and in China, like all over the place. And so any user went to get it, it would get it from somewhere local.
Right, and the reason why you would do that is you're thinking, wait, the internet is worldwide. Why can't I just get it from a server in Japan? There is always the issue of the speed of light and the speed of electrical switches.
Yep.
And so even if you're going the speed of light, going across the country, like from the west coast to the east coast of the US, or going from Europe to Japan, that is still going to take the amount of time necessary for light, the transit time to get to the server and the transit time to give the response back. Under optimum conditions, that would be the speed of light. It's going to be much less than that.
Of course.
The hardware involved.
And actually, the amount of hops you actually go through is important. On switches,
Right.
actually access with data protocol.
And when you're trying to get a website to come up quickly, you want to get it, optimally, you want to get like 100 millisecond response time, or definitely within 1 second or two. And because most of the time people will just go like, I don't feel like waiting, I'm going to go to the next one. And when you add in that transit time just to communicate, you start to lose before you even start.
Right.
And so that's why you have these geolocations, so that geocaching, so that if you are in New York, you end up hitting a server that's in New York, and so you don't have that transit time involved, and you just have the speed of the servers.
We at Netflix, we have a server hub on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and somewhere in Europe as well, which is actually our servers that do the processing of data, deliver the applications, all that. And then we also have a whole bunch of these physical blocks that hold our entire catalog of movies all over the place. I don't even know how many there are. And
also like an ISP with an ISP,
yes,
so that they can reduce their bandwidth costs.
Exactly. So when you're loading an app, you're actually hitting one of our servers, and it's actually Amazon's cloud services on the West Coast, East Coast, or Europe. And then if you actually are starting to stream a video, that video file is coming probably a lot closer to you.
So the reason we bring this up is because Akamai was allowing his website to be transmitted elsewhere, and also acting as
Akamai was allowing Krebs' website to be hosted on multiple locations.
Yes.
Yeah.
To be available anywhere, that high availability of many different locations. And they were also acting as a sort of security blanket, in that everywhere on the internet, especially if someone doesn't like you, they can launch what's called a distributed denial of service attack.
DDoS, sure.
And that is, they'll, for example, hit your website with, just like you would go to someone's website, they would have what was known as a bot, a compromised computer, hit that website and over, and then have a whole bunch of other ones do the same thing. So you can't really distinguish when you're looking at the logs whether or not it is a real person or whether it is part of the automated attack.
Right.
That's why they're very difficult to combat in many cases. In addition to that, they can have so many machines hitting at the same time that you end up with just overloading the resources. Akamai is great.
Even the network, without Akamai, you could even destroy the ISP's network infrastructure. You can basically stop all traffic from flowing, right, because the switch is overwhelmed. So with Akamai, I'm assuming that would be a lot harder to do.
Yes. Akamai, one of their reasons to be is that they can get out this information and cache that information that you have, and handle for banks and other large organizations that may have many enemies. There may be state-sponsored attacks, things like that. Well, as we said earlier, Brian Krebs is notable within the community as someone that has been a thorn in organized crime online. Organized crime doesn't tend to take well to people who are a thorn in the side of organized crime. So they have launched repeatedly distributed denial of service attacks against Akamai, trying to take his site down. And Akamai, to their credit, has said, no, this is important, and having this voice taken away as a form of mob influence is not how we want the internet to be.
And this is really good that Akamai is willing to do this, because if Brian Krebs had handled the costs of all that traffic, it would bankrupt him.
Sure.
Right? I mean, because he's not making that much money.
Right. To handle as much traffic as we're going through, what he normally has to deal with would cost somewhere in the range of $150,000 a year, which is far more than a journalist is going to be able to manage for just giving out a website.
Okay. So what's the news? So that's the background. Go ahead.
Yes. Until Akamai was hit with over 600 gigabits per second sustained attack.
That's incredible. So 600 gigabits, 650 gigabits a second requests, just that much requests.
Yes.
And a HTTP request is not a very large payload. It's not like you're
Well, it may not have
requesting
just
with
been
an
HTTP, but yeah, there are a variety of things you can do to try to take a site down.
Right.
But it was twice as large as the previous largest attempt they had ever seen.
So what did Akamai do?
So
Did they
Akamai at that point
say,
was
"Sorry,
saying like, yeah, we can't. This is really punching into our bottom line. They're looking into the possibility of millions of dollars of liabilities to keep this up, and they have fought the good fight, but they had to cry uncle. And Brian Krebs, to his credit, was saying like, I don't blame them. Like this is.
So does that mean Krebs is down?
It does not, because Google has stepped up to the plate.
Oh, really? And they have, of course, a very large infrastructure.
Yeah, they have something called Project Shield. It's a program run by Google
to do exactly this.
Yes, to help protect people like journalists from online censorship. And this is an article that Brian Krebs talks about, which is the democratization of censorship. It used to be that it was just state-sponsored actors. You know, someone in Iran who's the head of government, who's high up in government, saying, we don't want these dissidents to be able to get this information, so we're going to block it. Or we talked about the Great Firewall with China.
Sure.
Say, we don't want you to have access to this information.
Where it's really a barrier of a network layer. Like one part of a network is isolated such that the traffic can get into it. That's one way of doing it. And that's, you know, in North Korea, that's like that, right? Like traffic is completely restricted. Okay, go on.
But the issue now is that it's not just a state-sponsored actor that can cause these problems. Anyone who has a botnet, in other words, someone has used an exploit to get on someone's machine and then be able to use that as a jump-off point to attack.
In a war ground situation, it would be a terrorist type of attack, right? Where it's an individual small group that's not doesn't own a lot of territory. You don't use the terminology. I know it's a lot of heavyweight. We'll get to that some other time.
Yeah.
So anyway, this can be an individual or a small group that does this kind of attack. It's no longer a governmental takedown.
Right. And in addition to that, we've talked about the Internet of Things from time to time. Like all these little devices that have access to the web, including refrigerators or your
We're
car.
talking about a lot. The ability to make a large botnet is increasing all the time because people are making more and more exploits in their homes.
It used to be just you had a Windows XP machine. Okay, stop doing that. Go to Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10.
But now you bought a security camera. You don't even know it's
exactly the security cameras are another huge one because they're always on.
Well, so it sounds like the Shield project of Google is going to be something that's going to kind of be required in some sense to protect us, right?
Yes.
Is Akamai helping with it, or is it just like handing it over?
I think Akamai is just handing it over.
Because it seems like the thing to do with this would be to make it a protocol where Akamai and Google and like a few of the large companies could come together and have one protocol that help each other. Because then you're distributing it across all resources rather than one owner. Because at some point the request could get large enough where Google's like, this is too expensive. That could be a while.
If you have enough resources that you're really putting a dent in Google's ability to publish on the net and be quick about it,
we have other problems.
We have other problems. That's getting into the area actually where you start getting public-private partnerships where Google goes like, look, this is what's going on. They start contacting the FBI. They start getting involved in the State Department. Yeah, something that individual journalists don't have a resource.
Well, thanks, Miles. So you recall the Defense Distributed? You know what Defense Distributed is? It's an organization that's been putting up plans to 3D print handguns. Yes. And there's a court case, Defense Distributed versus Department of the State, and the general idea is this is free speech. We can put these plans up. The Defense Department says, no, you can't. That doesn't sound like a good idea. And this has been fighting in the court. And most recently, in a 2-to-1 decision, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals was not persuaded that the defense distribution's right of free speech under the First Amendment outweighs national security concerns. So national security won on this one. The majority, should I read it?
Fifth Circuit also, just for a point of reference, is South Louisiana.
In general, though, this idea of trying to take down knowledge to make us safer seems like a fool's errand. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I get the idea that you want to make you don't want somebody to necessarily profit off of it, meaning like they don't want this company to be able to sell ads and make an income and profit off of distributing stuff that is questionable on its benefit to society. But, and their argument of the First Amendment right seems to me pretty important. So when you start attacking and winning against First Amendment, it's tricky.
This is an area where the Second Amendment actually has I think, a greater precedence.
Also,
to say that the right of the populace to arm themselves. I don't want to quote the Second Amendment.
yeah, no, we know it, yeah.
That you would not be allowed, that you would be allowed to go to a gun store and buy that, but you wouldn't be allowed to make one in your own home, which is what this amounts to. Like if you had a milling machine, would you be allowed to bore a hole and make a working gun? And
well, of course, there's no rules against that. I mean, you can do what you want. You can't sell them without a gun license to sell them.
And so there comes the question of what about the plans? Like the plans for giving to a milling machine.
Yeah, giving the plans to how to make a gun with the milling machine kind of rule set in no way is that restricted. No, obviously not. That's completely clearly the First Amendment. Now I'll give you a reason for that. That's in books. That's in paper books you can get in the library.
Right.
So from that perspective, you know that we're protecting that knowledge, if you will. So because it's easy.
But what's not in general public ability is knowledge of how to create a nuclear weapon.
Yes, we did decide that that was important enough. And that's the thing, this is outweighs national security concerns is the argument here. I totally agree that nuclear weapons are important enough to subdue the amount of knowledge we have in that.
See, now you're saying there's guns, a line.
There's now totally, but I don't think national security and handguns, you can argue that any knowledge of being able to create handguns can in any way affect national security, considering the amount of guns we already have in the States. Like, it doesn't seem like who cares? Now you can have more of them. In some ways, I don't see that.
I don't agree necessarily with the rationale, but I believe that the rationale they were using was we have restrictions for felons or others, whether they be foreign nationals that are on the terrorist watch list or not, to purchase firearms through established channels.
Yes.
And that ceases to be an impediment if you can print your gun.
Okay, but Miles, this is my point here. I can go to the hardware store and make a gun with plumbing parts. Like, this is now, and I granted that I'm a maker and I'm an engineer and all that stuff.
Well, let's also be clear that the plans here for making a gun are, the gun is basically a zip gun. It's not,
it's a one-shot.
You're not making an
gun of plastic, that's right. And that zip gun compared to one that I'd make at a hardware store, which is also going to be a zip gun, right? Rubber band controlled, whatever. They're equivalent in almost every way, except that one requires an expensive machine and almost no knowledge, and the other requires almost no expense and some knowledge. But that knowledge, I don't put that at a high level of importance because that's something I taught myself to. Like, I don't know how to do it. I've never done it, but I know I could do it. Like, it's not. There's not a lot of skill here.
Yeah.
To do this.
My take on it is the horses are already out of the barn.
Yeah.
Like, 3D printing already exists. Being able to send plans around already exists. Mm-hmm. And if you ban it in one area, that means that in another jurisdiction it is open, you download the plans, and it's going to be whack-a-mole where you are always 3 steps behind.
Okay, but that's the point of this that I can be concerned about, and that's why it's not a Second Amendment issue in my mind. It's a First Amendment issue. Because if you successfully say some knowledge is not acceptable, mm-hmm. and it's tenuous that it has any relevance to what safety and national security is. I mean, you can weapon aside, because that's clearly, in my mind, I think most rational people would say that is a national security concern. If you start moving in another direction, well, then is it, maybe it makes sense financially not to be able to print from your home inkjet cartridges that ignore the DRM on a printer.
Right. What I was saying,
there's a boundary that, yes.
Yeah, what I was saying though is that it is a fool's errand. I don't think that they can do that. Mm-hmm. I do think that if you really wanted to restrict these types of activities,
yes,
that you restrict access to ammunition.
You mean gunpowder?
Yes, but also just ready-made bullets. But yeah, because just the deterrent of having to make your own bullets is enough to deter a lot of folks, especially because they become a lot more valuable, and you don't want to just
you don't want to use them. You want to aim better.
But I don't know that that's also going to be realistic in this country either, because there were a lot of people when Obama was first elected that said, "Oh my God, he's going to take all our guns," and there was a huge run on the gun store, and ammunition was flying off the shelves, and then there was no gun control. And
the thing that frustrates me about this kind of stuff, and it has to do, it reminds me of security theater, in the sense that, yes, you could say ammunition, let's just stop ammunition, except that you can make an air-controlled weapon that kills, like just compressed air. So like there's ways to get around all these things. So you're not gonna stop.
Bear in mind, when you're talking about
volume, I mean, it's really the amount.
If you're talking about an air rifle, you're not talking about the same velocities in those guns. You're not talking about the same mass that's being shot through the air in many cases.
So actually, I thought that was true, but air guns have become very popular. In the UK, they're extremely popular for hunting because you can't get gunpowder guns as easily. And so explosive guns, I don't know what they're called. Anyway,
standard gun.
Yeah, exothermic reaction guns. So a lot of investment's gone into these, and now you can get 38. That's the brands of the bullet. I don't know weapons very well.
But 38 is the size.
Yeah, the size. Yeah, 22 and 38. But you can get a pellet that size that it goes almost speed of sound in air. So that is a deadly. Like that is extremely deadly. Not machine guns and not auto fire and all that stuff.
Extremely deadly. Gunpowder
is more
pellets do go faster than sound.
Yeah,
in many cases. So that's what I mean, though. It's not. There is still a minimization of that effect.
I think that what you're talking about is making a barrier of complexity is a good way. It is a part of the deterrent. Making scarcity is a deterrent. So if you structure the society to be in that way, and this stopping the spread of being able to print guns does add some kind of barrier. And if we produce enough of those, it helps at some level. Is that kind of the idea you got?
Yeah. At the same time, I am an advocate for some gun control. Not all. I'm not looking to ban all guns, mostly because I don't think it would be possible in this country.
Right. So you're more of a practical person.
I try to be pragmatic about it, but I mean, who knows? But this just seems an area where, even if you are on the side of gun control, there are too many unintended consequences of this. Yeah. In addition to it not being.
And besides, humans having guns is not the problem. Artificial intelligence taking over. So what's Google got up its sleeve lately?
Google a while ago was making, or has been pushing the envelope in terms of image recognition.
Yeah.
You have a random photo, or I want to say random to the computer, but your own personal photos.
I take a picture somewhere, I upload that picture, and Google says what it's in.
Right, and they have something that they call show and tell, TensorFlow, and they have actually trained it so that it can say, in this particular example, it has a couple of dogs on a beach, and it correctly captioned it as a dog is sitting on the beach next to a dog. I mean, the wording is a little still ridiculous next to another dog, but considering the fact that there are two dogs and they're both sitting on a beach, that was extremely impressive. The news behind this, though, is that Google is open sourcing the model for its machine learning system. called Show and Tell, which is the backbone to their TensorFlow. Yeah.
And in the model, this model release is faster to train and better at capturing images, meaning it's better at, is it actually producing, helping with the natural language aspect of it, or just in general listing out the things?
I think they try they're trying to make it fit with natural language. Their goal is to try to make it so that you have not just a prepackaged set of captions, but something that sounds like a valid, well coiffed chance to describe it.
It's interesting. This open source package is actually better than the 2015 image captioning contest run by Microsoft, the COCO contest. The winner of that, this one's better than that, and it's open source. So, I mean, okay, additionally, I've been using the service of Google for a while in Google Photos, updating all my photos to Google, and I can now search, Paris trees 2014, and I see a park in Paris that I was at in 2015. It's incredible. And you can do all the Google search features of like, I want to see trees plus dogs minus water, right? Like it's that good. And it's a little eerie. And anytime it succeeds, I have this kind of giddy scare.
Like, I feel less like a unique snowflake.
I'm not important at all. I actually don't have any fear of it or concern of it, but I'm definitely excited by its use. At the same time, I'm understanding that I'm adding to Google's power. Not that's not so bad.
The ability for self actuation is something that is still out of range for computers that I've seen thus far. But in terms of specific tasks given to computers, we're running into fewer and fewer that humans can do that computers can't.
Right.
And I honestly think it's only a matter of time before computers can actually start programming open-ended problems.
I totally disagree. We're so far out from that. This is very clearly pattern matching. Now, granted, we're pretty good at it, but clearly what it's doing is just here's 4,000 images of dogs and beaches and sand, and here's an image. Are any of those things in there? Like that's all it's doing, and I know that's amazing, but it's not like.
I wonder whether or not you were overestimating how much variety there is in the typical programming environment.
But keep in mind that we're not talking about them programming and understanding what the meaning of the dog is. No,
you don't have to understand.
I know, but that's the point. Is that it can do things because it has large sample sets. So I love the idea of training with positive feedback systems. Like that whole concept is wonderful. But the truth is, there's only certain things you can do if you have to rely on. Here's a whole bunch of definitions. Now do something like what I just defined. There's only a subset of knowledge and of thought that can be done in that way.
Right. But what happens when you get to the point when you say, I want a shop that sells this type of things, and I want to be able to have a sale, and I want to be able to some things that are part of maybe a basic package, and then you have to hire a programmer to fine-tune it or make some other arrangements.
I agree.
There are a lot of areas where you have a well-defined problem set that there's a lot of existing, there's a large existing corpus of information of algorithms and of general architectural layout that already exists, that could be plugged in together, and then you need the logic to be able to make sure that they integrate well.
I totally agree, but then you need the logic as the piece that's still going to take it in mind. Meaning that it's amazing the amount of APIs we have available to us. And this is another one, right? This is an imaging, analyzing, and categorizing system, which is extremely powerful and amazing. At the same time, we have whole giant infrastructures of APIs with regards to the stock market. We have giant infrastructure APIs with regards to Twitter feeds and news feeds. There is a lot going on that are available with really simple implementations for engineers to do. Right now, it's easier to make an application than it ever has been before. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to be able to randomly create things, have computer systems randomly create useful things. Like, I
didn't say randomly create useful things. I meant the day-to-day things that we many times need a programmer for.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, totally. I mean, but
that's what I was saying.
But that's
Not saying that they would self-actuate. I'm not talking about them creating a new.
Every API is that. Every time you make a complex thing with a simple interface, you do that. You reduce the need for programs. When Flickr came out with their API to allow you to look at people's feeds and show images and display them and find images of certain types, that capability was really easy to do. All of a sudden, there was programming 101 steps that were like, hello world, here's someone's images. And that is something that would have been a lot more complex without that API.
That is something where I think we're different. Like, I think of chess. Teaching a computer how to play chess